very enthusiastic speakers for today to do just that for us. I chose in particular two very vivacious people because of what they have done in their lives to overcome obstacles in order to find people who want to join them. Yes, that is what we want. People to join us in all the good work we do for women and girls. We need to advertise ourselves. We need to promote the help we give so many others. I have for some time now admired the California AAUW way of promoting their causes. They seem to be passionate about everything, and as far as I know, have kept their branches going quite well during the COVID years. So our second speaker for today is Diane Owens, who is just coming down off of her years as California's state president. So she'll be speaking to us from California. So how did I choose to ask Linda Newell, our first presenter for today? Well, I get in the mail a little newspaper called the Centennial Citizen, and Linda writes an article for this paper every once in a while. I saw one of her articles and really liked what she wrote. I was so impressed that I said to myself, I just have to ask this lady if she would be so kind to help our organization out. Surprise, surprise, she said yes. I liked Linda's story about when she became a senator, kind of by default, as no one would run from her district, and she was willing to help anybody. But nobody came along, so she built up a team, and she got voted in 2 times, 2 terms. That is what we in AAUW need right now. I am hoping some of Linda Newell's pluck, as my mother used to say, will rub off on us for ideas for our branches. Linda is here to speak to us about being creative in these complex times. Linda?
Hello. Hi, everybody. I know that this is not exactly what we might like. We might like to still be in person, but on the other hand, it also allows us some opportunity to be together from different areas of the state that normally wouldn't be able to. So, so thank you. Oh my gosh, Joan, that was very humbling. Thank you for that introduction. I would like to start out with a couple of thanks, and one is to Joan for reaching out via my column. I've had a column in the Colorado Community Media papers for over a decade now, and it's a monthly column. I think I've missed maybe 2 or maybe 3 over 10 years, and I have gotten a lot of interesting feedback, some very positive and some, you know, maybe this isn't how I agree, but I love all of that because that shows diversity of thought. But I just recently found out that my column has been cut as of actually as of this month. And I was thinking about AAUW because and what I have in common with AAUW in that being a woman who has children and who has children who are looking to have children, the Roe v. Wade decision was really devastating for me and my family, as well as millions of other women and people with uteruses across the country. So because of that column, and they're not saying it was because of that column, but because of how I spoke during that column, I think it was just too much for them. And it was being problematic over the last few months with the new editor anyway. And it just turned out to be something that I realized that I'm okay. I'm really going to be okay with losing what I think is losing that and letting it go because of what I stood for. And that to me is what AAUW has been in my family, which is, and I should share this story. My mother used to be, I grew up with AAUW because my mother was a faculty wife. My father was a professor, and she, back in the 60s, was in AAUW, a chapter president. And then when I became a graduate, I went on to be an educational foundation program chair. This was in California, actually. And I realized in preparing for this that the reason why I was engaged was that we were doing something to advance all of us who needed to have more equity. And so for me, I'll get back to the column idea in a few minutes, but that it kind of gave me a little bit of oomph as I was preparing for today and thinking about creativity and what does that mean and how can we be more creative together? How can we be more creative individually and communally? So, so thank you, Joan. Thank you to AAUW for inviting me. And thank you, Susan Brody, for helping me get situated. And I'm going to go ahead now and just share just a couple of pieces about me that might give you some context of what we're going to be talking about today and why creativity is a huge push in my life. So I'm not going to go into my whole life story, but I will tell you my first profession was in theater and television and music. And so that has really inspired my entire trajectory of anything I do. And that is because of that lens of creativity, no matter where I am, no matter what room I'm in, no matter what community I'm in or task I'm doing. And one of the principles of that for me has been the improvisation technique of yes and so we'll be talking about that too. So I wanted to kind of give you that history, and then I went into HR and learning and organizational development and created a niche in conflict and conflict resolution, management, and transformation, and really looking at what we can do with our divisiveness in the world, in our country, in our homes, in our hearts, and the inner conflicts. So from that, I went into the Senate, barely made it my first try, and made it by 0.053%, which is about a vote and a half per precinct. So when people say votes don't count, your vote doesn't count, it really does. So I know that AAUW is very engaged in equity of voting rights, and so that is also an issue for me, obviously, from being in politics. And then I went out of the Senate, and I thought, what in the world am I going to do? I really went into a depression, not a clinical depression, but a depression of so much activity and so much meaning and engagement in legislation, politics, etc., that I really missed it. And I thought, what is my next trajectory? Where should I be going? And what am I losing? I was focusing on what I was losing instead of what could I gain. And so I decided to go to seminary and get my master's in social justice and ethics. And the reason why I chose a seminary was that it would give me a more holistic lens and a more creative way of looking at social justice and ethics, not just from the political, not just from the policy, but also from the holistic spiritual realm of what I know I needed And what I believe we all need is a more holistic approach to what we're doing. And so that's what I did. And I will say all of that will be peppered in through what I'll be talking about today. So that's why I mentioned a little bit about my background, because you'll see the context of what we'll be talking about today. So I'm going to share my screen and we will see if this works. Let's see here. Okay. Now, we tried this before in our practice session. It wasn't working to do a full screen. So forgive me for all of the tabs, no judging for all my tabs open. So being creative in these complex times, I was playing around with this and here's what came up. Being creative in these complex times, I've got to think outside the box. I'm putting my words outside the box. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is, but it really wasn't quite right. And so I wanted to try different things. So I thought, okay, well, maybe we'll do this and we can see more of the colors and we can see more of openness. So I'm going to really go outside the box and not have a box at all. And I thought, no, something is missing. So I thought, okay, yeah, hello, I need to include Colorado AAUW. And I have to include 8/20/22 because 8/20 is my birthday. Today is my birthday. And I thought, what better way to celebrate my birthday than to talk with a bunch of women who are engaged and who are lifelong learners, and I thought there's no better way. So that was missing, and the font. So I know that font doesn't seem like a big deal to people usually. However, it is one small way that we can be creative and we can think about our creativity. We can think differently, much differently sometimes when we see different colors, when we see different font styles. And I know that that's a tiny little thing, but the reason why I bring that up is because sometimes it's just the tiny little things that can make a difference. And so let me go to the next slide. So when Joan came to me and we were talking about creativity and increasing membership and building branches and designing and developing branches for the next level, what does that mean? Where does that leave you? Where does that leave me in assisting you or hopefully getting a spark? And so that's what I was doing, was thinking, yeah, so what kind of ideas could come to me and where would I get them? And so I went through and I went through the logical steps of how I would create a presentation and realized that I was getting nowhere. And so I love this picture because I found this picture once and just thought, yes, how many times do we do the right steps and we think we're doing everything correctly, that yes, this makes sense and it makes logical sense and it's linear, but we get nowhere. And so I realized, okay, then I need to go back and I need to go back to AAUW and look at, so what is their mission? What is it that they want to drive? And I know that you've all seen this and experienced it. And we've seen actually Betty Boyd, one of my great mentors from the Senate, who I think is on this call. She has been a huge proponent of the gender equity and economic security at the legislature with and for AAUW. So, so she came to mind with me, and especially in thinking about her and her ability to be able to live her mission. And I'm just going to give a shout out for her that that she lives her personal mission. She has a personal mission. And so I just shout out to you, Betty. Anyway, so AAUW, our mission to lead the fight for fair pay and equity, economic opportunity. So you all know that. You all know your mission. So in thinking about what ideas can you use in moving on to the next level, it's great to know your mission, but there is a philosophy in Buddhism, which is to be what the space needs. So what's theirs? What is their mission? We continue to think about what our mission is, what our group mission is, but what about the people we want in? What about the people we want to attract, the new members, the new bench of leaders that we want in the organization? What are their personal missions? And what do they want? And how can they, how can we attract them if we don't know more about them, if we don't know more about not only their mission, but about them and what their ideas are and what ideas they can bring and what ideas that that we might be able to have with them, the synergy. So all of a sudden, in contemplation with this, I just had a bunch of ideas come through. And so I'm going to go through a couple of different models. Interaction Design Foundation, you might have heard about them. They're one of the organizations that focuses on the design thinking model. It's also, you'll see UX design as well. And so the what we have in that are 5 steps. Basically, you empathize, meaning you understand what their mission is. You understand what their interests are, what their personalities are, what their communal needs are, and what would they need in an organization. Not what we need to attract, but what do they need so that we can fill that space and we can be with them together in community. So empathize, then you define the problem, you state your user's needs and problems, then you go through and you ideate and you challenge the assumptions. One of the key parts of creativity and ideation is, instead of just doing a usual brainstorming session, you focus on challenging the assumptions. You're making assumptions that all millennials are X, or all Gen Xers are Y, or you really challenge your assumptions with design thinking. And then you do a prototype. You start to create ideas and solutions. And then you do a test and see, does it work? You try it out with a pilot group or something. So that's the design thinking model. However, I was thinking, wait a second, I am still thinking too constricted. And where is the humanness, the more humanness in our group, in our community? And I thought of appreciative inquiry, and some of you might know this, or it was AI before AI was AI. So it's not artificial intelligence, but it's appreciative inquiry. My uncle was actually at Case Western University and oversaw the beginning of appreciative inquiry and the genesis of it. And this is taking a more positive approach, where you affirm at the very beginning, what is the best of what we have? What is the best of what we offer? And assuming positive intentions, assuming, instead of looking at the problems and looking at the negatives, or what we're lacking, how can we build on the strengths that we have? So it's very strengths-based. And then you go into the dream and what that might be. You are, that's brainstorming again, but it is also, what is the world calling for? What is needed out there, as opposed to what are we doing the normal, usual of, this is what we want to present, or this is what we have, or are we calling it in from the reverse and looking at what it needs? What does the space need? And then going into design, it's similar to the design thinking model. We go into design, and then what they call destiny, or some people call it delivery. How do we empower not only our group, but how do we empower the people coming in? And then how do we sustain that? So that was all great. And then I thought about the historical context that we are in right now. How in the world can people who are worried about having children because they don't have confidence in our democracy, how can those people, they're worried about climate, they're worried about having enough water for their families to live, they're worried about getting enough food on the table for their families, they're worried about the ability to be able to go to college, or their kids to be able to go to college. With all of that that's going on, they're worried about how am I going to be accepted into this this new world of racial and identity uprising that we desperately need as a community. How am I going to be able to fit into that? And how am I going to be able to thrive in that? So the historical context of it really shouted out to me that we cannot forget that. In fact, we have to remember that, that is absolutely critical. So part of it to me is being able to reflect on ourselves as who we are as individuals, but who we are as a community, absolutely with the context of the outer community, and then listening and empathizing with the others that we want to attract, looking and asking what is needed, being open to radical change. And I think that this is something that that people, I suspect that many people are around my age, and maybe my identity as a cishet elder white woman. I am assuming that, which I probably shouldn't, but the phrase radical change can sometimes be scary to people. And so this term of radical change is I think something that we should probably be talking about, which is, what is it that I'm afraid of? What is it that we're afraid of? Either letting go, or welcoming in, or what do we just not know? And so for me, in preparing this presentation, but also in thinking as a person, why, and I know that we would want to have the younger so that they will survive us, in the future of the organization. And people who may not look like us, how are we attracting those people? And so I went out and I did a little bit of research, and I talked to a few millennials, and I said, so why would you join AAW, or what would attract you to it? And what I got, now it was just a sampling, but what I got was that the context is that as millennials and Gen Zers, they are about extremes, either extreme activism or extreme fun, and I know I'm generalizing here, so I just want to acknowledge that. But on the whole, the research shows that they do have more both and, as far as gender identity goes, as far as race and ethnicity identity goes, they're very, very fluid with that. But when it comes to what they want to do, they're either in the streets, at the capitals, or they're having fun, and they're going out and doing rock climbing and that kind of stuff. So what are we doing to attract people like that? But I also wanted to also say to be very conscious with being easy and gentle on ourselves, that there are ways that we also need to remember, I'm thinking about this in a paradigm of we have to fix something. That's white supremacy. That's capitalism. We need to remember that there isn't always something to fix. And maybe it's really okay that I lose a column, because maybe there's something else that's more expansive. Maybe it's really okay that membership has constricted or has declined, because some things need to constrict and contract in order to blossom out. Now, I am definitely not saying that losing bodily autonomy and having the government try to make decisions over my own body or the millions of other women and people with uteruses, I am not saying that. However, what I am saying is seize the moment of the historical context. We are at a precipice where activism and the especially around identities, that's very powerful. So what are we doing to use that as what the space needs so that we can fill that space and then build a bench? So let me just see if there are any things that I really left out in my notes, or I do also want to say that intentionality, to me, I learned this in meditation practices in seminary, that there are things that we do that are just unconscious and routine, and that we are I don't want to say automatons, but we just do naturally. We brush our teeth first, and then we wash our face, or whatever those kinds of individual personal routines are. But if you did those same tasks, but changed the process, changed it up a little bit, and changed the how, or you put the intentionality behind it, then every single small thing can turn out to be expansive. So, so I did want to talk about when was the last time that a group sat and before a brainstorming session, you had time to reflect and you just sat silently, maybe journal writing all together, maybe silently writing on flip chart papers, if you're together, or, blackboards if you're doing it online, or when have groups been able to just sit and reflect and be intentional in listening to themselves, but especially also one of the ideas that I had about attracting new membership is how do you relate? How do you meet them where they are? And meeting them where they are, for instance, there's the lack of social media, honestly, on AAUW, with AAUW is astounding. And that's a silence, and you cannot meet them where they are unless you meet them where they are, which is online or out doing things, so meeting them where they are is the other key thing that I wanted to mention, but with intentionality and with asking. So being that curious person. Why would a non-binary, gender fluid person want to join an organization with women in their title unless they feel welcomed, unless they felt validated? And so I wanted to throw that out there. I know it's kind of a topic that you are probably already starting to germinate on. But one of my children is non-binary, and they told me, I don't know if I would want to join an organization and that had women in its title unless they came to me, unless they spoke to me, unless they really wanted to be inclusive. And so being inclusive and being intentional is critical when it comes to creativity. So I will stop there, and we can have a few minutes of question and answers, and see. I'm hoping that was helpful, and I'm hoping that it has spurred some questions. Susan, if you'd be willing to navigate that.
That's what I was going to do. I first of all want to say nearly everybody just wants to thank you so much for sharing your birthday with us. Most of the questions so far are about, oh my goodness, it's your birthday. So I do want to add that in and invite people because I think you have just, opened up a lot of avenues of conversation, and I'd like to see people put in more questions into the Q&A so that we can have more of a conversation. I do see a third one up there. Let's see if I can find Mary. I would like suggestions on redirecting your mind and thoughts to look for possibilities when you're overwhelmed with daily negative thoughts. That is, if your current focus is making it through the challenges we already face, how do you stop and look for opportunities and solutions? So I think that's one of those historical contexts. We're in a time when it is pretty, messy.
Yeah.
Messy.
Yes, messy.
In the mental space, it is pretty messy when you have a lot of thoughts clamoring for your thinking.
I love that. I love this question because yesterday I along with my nephew and one of my kids, we were taking a walk through the city of Golden, downtown Golden, and we stumbled upon this, and I am going to share this one thing real quick, and this will. There. We found what is called tiny art. And we're walking down the street and we see this. And to me, that is hilarious. I mean, E.T. is my favorite movie of all time. It has so many layers theologically in it, and emotionally, and it's a trauma-informed type of movie. And I'm walking down the street and we found this. And I'm thinking, E.T., oh my gosh, this to me is a step in mindfulness. And it's the mindfulness that can bring you into or take you out of, I should say, the mess, and mindfulness of how can I focus on the possibilities? How can I focus on the appreciative inquiry, and getting my mind out of that? We are vacillating back and forth between those spaces all the time right now, with all of the stuff that's going on around us. So it is truly taking one moment and focusing it on the tiny art that is in your life, the tiny art that is in our community. And I don't necessarily mean just art, but you know what I mean. It's those moments of grace, and those moments of contemplation, and those moments of for instance, we live in a gorgeous state. When was the last time you stopped and you literally smelled a rose, you looked at the mountains and stood there for a moment and thought only about the mountain and allow the mountain to speak to you?
I appreciate that. And I think that keywords there are stop and breathing. I think one of the key things that initiates that stopping or completes the stopping is to focus on breathing. But then that's just me.
Yes.
Not just me, but that is another addition to that. In our, there's an individual who's looking to get into the chat, and I'd encourage you, Linda Preston, to go to the Q&A on your screen, that the chat is not available for questions. Only Q&A is available for questions. So please look for that. And if you have something to ask, I'd be glad to forward it on. Or Linda, I don't know if you're also looking at the Q&A, but I did have another person ask about hold on. I can't get back to my Q&A myself. Phyllis Graham wants to know, since you're a SPHR, which is an HR professional, how does that affect your passion in social justice issues?
I love that, Phyllis. Yay for SPHR. So for those of you who don't know, SPHR is a senior professional in human resources, and it's kind of like the CPA exam for HR professionals. So much of my work now in HR is in conflict in DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion spaces. And so it's really taken, before I was just looking at it from just the workplace, the pay equity in the workplace, the gender equity in the workplace, et cetera. And then when I went to seminary and I went deeper into social justice, I also went into chaplaincy, which is the other reason why I wanted to do it in seminary. And I learned the trauma-informed piece. And so what that taught me in chaplaincy was how am I now looking at people as they're coming and interviewing with me, or I'm recruiting them. I am looking for those trauma-informed pieces that inform how people are in the world in a socially just way. So thank you for asking that. It's given me a more holistic approach.
I also wanted to mention Jill Smith, who is our state membership vice president. Please consider joining AAUW in Colorado. Just no pressure, just saying.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I will tell you from my perspective, because why I was thinking about this actually in the shower today. Why haven't I joined AAUW? Because I've spoken at chapters before. Barb Daniels is my huge love friend in AAUW, and I mean, I have gone to events, I have supported them in many other ways, and I thought, why haven't I joined? And I really do wonder, is it because of time? Was it because of money? Was it because I'm finally moving out of poverty from being in both the legislature and seminary? But what was it? And so where have my efforts gone and not gone into AAUW? So I love that question, and I need to reflect on it. Good for you for asking too.
I was going to say, as the program chair in my branch, I'm looking to probably bring you in, because what you've shared today is somewhat overwhelming in terms of, oh my goodness, how do I apply this? How do I get this down to the nitty gritty? We've got challenges trying to meet what national wants. We've got challenges trying to see what our branch needs. We've got this incredible transition to trying to get out to more non-members who are not like us, to be more diverse. And I sometimes feel overwhelmed. So if you haven't thought about that, would you, one thing would you do next? Or what thing would you suggest next?
I would say that probably the reflection on not only who you are as an organization, but what have you been doing, that you've been doing the same tasks, you've been doing the same process, you've been doing the same thing over and over again, and you have not been getting results now. We are in a different world. We've had a pandemic to learn from. We've had lots of court decisions and laws and racial uprising. We've had so much to learn from, but I don't believe we've learned yet how to reflect. And so really self-reflection, but also reflection on those we want to attract, or those activities we want to attract in our world. I really do believe that if we had more reflection and downtime, which seems like downtime, but it's actually probably more active, spiritually and mentally and emotionally. If we were to do that and really self-reflect and then reflect on the others, I do believe that's the, in fact, I preparing for anything now, since my experience at ILIF, I absolutely start with the ritual of intention. I ask, what is it that the space needs? And then I see what shows up.
I appreciate that. For those of you who don't know, Linda was at ILIF's Theological Seminary for what, 2 years, 3 years, getting her
2.5.
2.5. And I appreciate you sharing that. We do have a question from Jane Fitzgerald, which is kind of following up to what we've been talking about. She says, how do we get in touch with millennials? We have a site and we don't seem to get any hits, or we're not getting anybody visiting it. Do you have any thoughts about other ways or better ways of connecting with perhaps not just millennials, but any of the other generations?
Well, having a website is wonderful, but if nobody is going to it, it doesn't make any difference, right? So it is meeting them where they are. They're not going out and looking for AAUW. They're not going out and looking for groups to join. What they will be doing is they're going to be hanging out on social media. They're going to be hanging out in the coffee shops, on the hiking trails. Churches are also experiencing this decline in membership. I mean, this is natural. And what if your membership would never come back to what it used to be? because the organization needs to change or modify. What if it needs to compost some things and let them die in order to give them rebirth? So meeting them where they are is critical. In fact, I was talking to these millennials that, asking them what they thought about AAUW and stuff. And I said, well, they have a website. And they said, oh yeah, well, I've never seen it, and then they were looking on Instagram, never saw anything. They looked on Twitter, never saw. So meeting them where they are instead of thinking we're going to attract them to us is important for anybody, but particularly millennials and Gen Zers.
Got it. All right. Well, that's exhausted the Q&A that I see up on the screen. Is there anybody else who has a question here? I'm willing to go because we started about 5 minutes late, I'm willing to go a little bit longer, closer to 10. But if we have no more questions, Linda, I might, if there's any last messages you'd like to convey to us. I think you've said some very strong things and some very direct things about the future for us.
Yeah, I would like to caution that I know that I've been pretty bold in some things and not necessarily complimentary. And so I wanted to name things though, because I don't believe I used to be the nicey nice white woman in the room, trying to be, really careful. And I've changed that because we don't have time to do that anymore. Not to say that we shouldn't all be civil and respectful and honorable. But that said, we need to name truths. And that needs to start with us and I'm going to say many of us are older white women. We need to, if we're going to be the elders in the room, and if we're going to have any wisdom, then we need to name the truths. And so that's acknowledging where you are. It's acknowledging that, okay, so yeah, you know what? The world, or not, well, maybe the world, but particularly this country right now is in crisis. And we cannot come from crisis in order to move through it. So we've got to, in order to be generative with positive action, we need to first name what we have. If we don't name that, you know what, there's a problem with extrajudicial killings of Black men and women, of particularly Black trans folks. There's a problem with this organization because, of X, Y, and Z. When I do group work, it's so important to name it, because how do you, it's like diagnosing anything. If you don't have the diagnosis, how can you have a treatment to go along with that? If you're not, if you're just saying, oh, no, I'm fine, and you're never going out and searching what is the diagnosis, you're never going to have a treatment that's going to work. So that is, so what I wanted to say about that is that I know that I've named some maybe some harsh realities here, but at the same time, I am a huge optimist, and I need to call forth that optimist sometimes and give myself grace. It may not be tomorrow, it may not be for a few months, and it may not be for a few years, but I'm going to give myself some grace and do what I can every day in order to create a better community for us all, and not look at just what's outside, but really look at what's inside and do some deep reflection.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks for summing it up. We missed Nancy Todd's request for a little bit of discussion of political climate, but you've only got like 3 minutes. So
Oh, okay. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Political climate.
political climate, 25 words or less, perhaps, or something.
Yeah. So Nancy Todd, another one of my favorite mentors in education. So the political climate is well, I lost a column over it, it looks like. But the political climate, though, is, if we look at it from a trauma-informed perspective and from a cultist perspective, because we are truly in a cult state right now. Some of us are in this country. And so looking at it from the trauma-informed perspective of the people with varying identities and what they need, and then looking at those we disagree with, and those who might be in a cult and might be following a leader who is crazy as hell. What are we doing from a trauma-informed perspective to honor those folks and to figure out what it is that they need? We are not going to be able to completely give them what they need, because the patriarchy is dying. And so because of that, they're feeling the fear. They are in reaction. And so of course they're going to act out, because that's how their fear shows up. It shows up in anger, and it shows up in rebellion. And so I appreciate you mentioning that, Senator Todd, because I think that that's another way that we can really help the divisiveness, is to look at the groups, the people and the individuals from a trauma-informed perspective, and see what they need, see what the space needs, fill what the space needs.
I appreciate that. Do you have a resource on trauma-informed perspective that you might put in that you could give me, and I will send it out to people, or give it to people? Because I feel like that's not a term that I'm familiar with particularly, and I would like to get more familiar with it. If you had,
yeah, I have whole books on it from my master's program. Yeah, I'll find you something that might be succinct, but it's basically, instead of looking at an identity, like, let's say I'm a white woman and I'm looking to work with a Black woman, let's say, it is thinking about and considering the trauma that they have in their bodies, the trauma that they work and live in every day, having to teach their children, if they encounter a police officer, living with that terror inside of them. If their kid isn't home by 10 p.m. and it's dark, are they going to be killed by a police officer? So it's those kinds of, the trauma informs you about how to work with them and how to live with them.
I appreciate that. If you did have something to send, I would appreciate it. I will get that out and put it perhaps on our website, wherever. But it's now 10 o'clock, and we are going to take a brief break. And I mean brief. Normally I have a 10-minute break, but we're really going for like 5 right now. So if Carolyn, you could put up our break sign. I want to thank Linda absolutely for her work and for all that she provided for us today. So come back in about 5. If it doesn't seem like enough, I'll give you a couple more, and we'll get our second speaker up here. And Linda, thank you so much.
Thank you. AAUW. Thank you for asking me to be here, and I hope to see you all in person. And could I get a copy of the Q&A in the chat by any chance, Susan, or could I do that just now and see if I can save it?
You can go to it, and I will. I believe I can print out the Q&A bet.
That would be wonderful, because I'd love to make sure I got